Hey, welcome to Getting Personal with Compt. I am Lauren Schneider, the head of brand and communications. This is a show that is all about uncovering the ways in which we can make the workplace more human. I love saying that because it tickles me every time.
All
With
fuzzy.
exactly. With me today is Lynn Walder. We are about to dive into a topic that I know is top of mind for many. I mean, that's kind of what the show is about. Topics that are top of mind. That is building authentic company culture and effective organizational strategies. Those things very truly go hand in hand. So, Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here because when we talked last time, you hit my passion spot, and I was like, I have a lot to say about this. So
I know. The fire was ignited on both ends because I got off of a prep call with you and I was like, yes, company culture. Yes, the things that we can do to make a change. Employees deserve better. They demand better. Um,
yes.
Lynn, I want to have you introduce yourself and your experience, your background to the audience so we can kind of lay the groundwork for what we'll be talking about today and why we are so passionately discussing this.
Yes, yes. So thank you again for having me and talking about a topic that I have been dearly attached to for many, many years. And when you hear a little bit of my background, you'll probably understand why. I was a lost career soul for much of my life. And so there's a whole time before I ended up joining the biotech industry. I've worked across 10 different industries at all different stage companies, nonprofit, for profit, all the way starting back from when I was like 15 years old. So there's a whole history before that. But I ended up in biotech back in 2010. And I was at a biotech called Vertex Pharmaceuticals and was an administrative assistant in the HR department. And Vertex Pharmaceuticals, for those who don't know about the biotech industry, is kind of looked at as like the golden child of Boston. And it was this wonderful, incredible scale up organization that was tackling rare disease and really difficult science, and was really trying to build a company that remained true to its original founder roots. And when I got there, there was 400 employees, and they were going to be scaling to 600 because they were going to be launching two very prolific and novel and new disease area medicines on the market. One was and is currently still on the market called actually I don't know what the official name is, but it's for cystic fibrosis,
Mhm.
which was a disease that would, unfortunately kill people by age 20. And this is as close to a cure as you can get for it. So working for a very amazing organization. And when you work in an organization like that, the people they hire in to do that kind of work push the boundaries in every which way. And working within the HR department, I was introduced to a whole new way of how important nurturing, building, and communicating, and not only that, but operationalizing the values and the norms for culture and what we define as culture. And I think there's confusion around what culture is in companies, especially in startups and scale ups. I was working with the best of the best and seeing how it translated into truly what worked. It was mind blowing and made me feel very good about the work that we were doing there. So that's where I was introduced to the concept of people strategy and operationalized culture, which is sometimes not brought into the conversation when you are talking about culture and trying to either discern, build, or integrate. And so that was kind of my intro to the biotech industry. And then I worked my way up in that organization and was supporting the CEO. It was actually, they went through three CEOs while I was there, and I was supporting the last CEO before I ended up departing to support another CEO at a small company. And when I went to the smaller company after that, I was supporting the CEO and the larger leadership team. And since they were only a 40-person company, they hadn't gone through a lot of the scale up pain yet of just
Mhm.
truly defining what their culture was and what they wanted it to be. And so I came in and became the de facto person partnering with HR to help guide the next evolution of the organization, from an internal communication standpoint, an employee engagement standpoint, and even a branding standpoint from the website, and again driving kind of the cultures and values work and culture building and stuff like that. And I learned a ton there because I was working cross-functionally, both at the leadership team level and at this level of the rest of the employee base. And you also could recognize what was working and what wasn't working because I was there for 6 years and I saw the evolution through that and the pivot points. So that was a wonderful experience. And then I departed there and started working at a place called Lab Central, where I actually partner currently with startups and scale ups that are spin outs and new, very small nascent entrepreneurs starting these biotech businesses. And I build business strategy programming for these leaders to help them build the business side of their business. And I do integrate the HR people strategy part into there. So I also get to see across 50 to 70 organizations, I would say over every 2-year period, how everybody is coming to the table and what they believe culture is or should be
Right.
versus what people are actually implementing, and also again what's working and what's not working. And so I help kind of guide and advise in that realm as well. I also do consulting on the side and have been brought in specifically for building and operationalizing culture. And that's my happy place is building an operationalizing culture. And we'll get more into that about the science of what I'm doing to come with a new approach because of those full years of experience and honestly some pain during that time, a lot of misunderstanding, and I think some missed opportunities of what we could be doing when you truly understand how important it is to see culture as a strategic need,
Mm,
be resourced and planned for and held accountable by everybody across the organization, but especially at the leadership team level.
right.
And how that actually drives the ultimate success of a business. And I think there's a missing conversation there. So I'll leave it at that. That's kind of the in a nutshell how I got to where I am and why I'm so passionate about culture building and operationalizing it as an accountability kind of framework for organizations.
I feel like that's a nutshell that I could crack in itself with this entire conversation, because it's so interesting to me that you moved further into the biotech space, because when I hear that, I think, oh, this is probably a culture of people who are taking their jobs very seriously. You can't introduce a lot of risk into this. There's It's almost like a sterile environment, so you wonder how they would create this like warm fuzzy culture through it.
Yeah, that is
So
really interesting. There is a very unique, I would say, foundation that we have to work with when you come into the biotech industry. I would say it's actually quite progressive in regards to
hmm,
appreciating how important culture is, especially in the early stages. And one of the reasons is because unlike when you're working at a product company where the timelines are very short of getting something to market and seeing the
right.
turnaround, in biotech, you're on 10, 20-year timelines. And there's the discovery portion and then the preclinical portion. And then you start getting to clinic. And then it takes a very long time to actually commercialize and sell a physical product.
Hmm.
In the beginning, you're actually selling your story and your reputation and your science of the idea of what you're selling. And a lot of that gets wrapped up into, well, how do I compete with all the other amazing science that's out there? How do I
Hmm.
recruit in and drive efficiency and speed and engagement within my organization when every biotech is trying to make their mark on changing the world for the better within a health human impact way? So in the end, culture in biotech is actually even one step above, I would say, a normal product that they can lean back on in shorter timelines because there's just a longer risk engagement timeline that you have to work with. So
Right.
it is interesting. There's a default to think that. Caveat here, a lot of our spinouts, they come out of academia.
Mm,
Academia has a very unique and traditioned culture of their own that's rooted in, I think, some behaviors that don't translate as easily or as well to support industry side of science. And so there is a toggle and a learning curve, many times a steep one,
right.
that this is one of the reasons I come in and help redefine their mindsets around collaboration, communications, actual structures for executive operations, setting foundational values. How do you pull those into your OKRs? How do you communicate to the rest of the organization? Like all these things that tie into that. Performance management is another one. So all the things that when I ask leaders, what do you think HR is? They tell me, oh, hiring good talent. And I have to educate that HR is the tactical aspect, and there's actually multiple verticals within HR. Talent acquisition just is one of those. And people strategy is the layer in that actually brings it to life. And these are all the other things that help your employees not only come in, but stay in and develop and reach their highest potential, not only for you, but for the business, for them and also for the business. So it's very exciting when you see the light bulbs go off, like, oh, I didn't realize that this is actually like a real strategic integration that I need to be planning for at the leadership level and having conversations
Right.
around this and resourcing it. So I appreciate that insight, because that's the default usually. It's very sterile. You're working with people who are very, nose to the lab, bench space, and they're actually quite engaged. And once they understand the concepts behind it, they're all in, and they resource it too. I will say that's why I like working in biotech. It's very progressive, very progressive.
You brought up something that was particularly interesting in the leadership level, where there is this perception of, for example, well, we have core values. That's enough, right? That'll drive great culture. And in preparing for this conversation, you had shared with me a very interesting philosophy around authenticity and core values and how these things relate or influence company culture. So I want to revisit that for our audience. Share your thoughts.
Okay, where should I start? Because this is what got me on fire last time when we started talking. Uh, this is actually what drove me, I think, to be much more mindful, meticulous, and build some more formalized frameworks around presenting what I consider to be kind of a broken system around the idea of core values. And again, I had been through multiple rounds of partnering with external communication firms, coming in and doing all the exercises, working from the ground up, and actually employee driven core values and how that works. And that was a beautiful process, but there were still gaps that were found in there.
Mhm.
And so I've been on it from both sides. And what I started recognizing is there was a pattern that I was coming across where the core values, one, were not being created until companies were at the 50 or 60 person mark, which I felt was becoming too late, because there was a convoluted intersection of too many values that everybody wanted to have on the wall. Then also, I was recognizing that leadership, they would champion the core values in the beginning and be very excited about them and drive them. But when push came to shove and real decisions and real resourcing had to be tied to those values, those went right out the window.
Right.
And so then there becomes actually this really breaking of trust between the leadership and the rest of the organization when they say, oh, these values are for you, but they're not really for us. And even if they don't say that, and they don't think that this is how it gets communicated, and people become jaded, and they become very they lose respect, honestly, for the structure of the organization and sometimes the leadership decision making process, or even having sometimes the feeling of talking out of two different sides of their mouth, where they feel it's hypocritical.
Right.
And this ultimately breaks down everything that you are trying to shore up through core values, which is expectation, psychological safety, high thriving teams, knowing where we're going, sense of impact, sense of belonging. All of these things that actually support the success are being broken down by this too late of integration, disconnection of leadership, thinking that, oh, that's an HR thing, put it under HR, and it's really, everybody else will follow it. And the more I dug into it, and the more companies that I've worked with through my span of the years, I realized that leaders were coming in too late and asking for core values because behaviors were starting to show up in the organization that they felt they would be able to correct if they were more codifying the behaviors that they were desiring for their company.
Right.
And that is a recipe for disaster. And so when I began working at Lab Central, I said, I want to test out a new way where I'm calling them foundational values, not even core values. They're coming from the leadership. They are revalidated and aligned with the employees. But the reality is that culture, ultimately, it's owned by everybody, but it is truly curated, discerned, and nurtured by the leadership and how they make decisions and what they choose to resource, especially in very tough times. And
Mhm.
culture and core values, not there to make everybody to feel happy, happy, nice. Even from a personal standpoint, values are there to pull us through the fire and to pull us through when we are feeling very lost and very confused and have to make really hard decisions. And so that's why I think getting it done earlier on and using that as a recruitment tool, so you are aligning the right values. Technicality and learning can always happen. If you do not have the right aligned values, when times get hard, that's when things fall apart. And it's like that in all parts of our life, in a marriage, in friendship, in any other relationships. You gravitate towards people who have similar values. And
Mhm.
again, I don't want to say that we're creating or trying to create an organization that's a bunch of robots around each other.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. You can have similar values and still deliver in different approaches, different lived experiences, and different mindsets. But those values have to be shared as a baseline and built off of. And so I wanted to come in and say, let's test this out and start more scientifically approaching how leaders actually behave, particularly in stress and crisis, because that's when
Mhm.
the real behaviors and the real like values come out, and you don't realize that. And do it under the 10 employee mark, cross section very specific assessments across the leadership team to find out what bubbles up to the top, use an assessment to revalidate that and also align the top priorities amongst the employees that currently are employed, and then create true authentic foundational values that are the default innate values of that leadership team that will help drive the organization. Another caveat here, there are values sometimes that are very important to scaling and successful businesses, and the leadership team may not have those in their top default innate values. That's okay. In to stay true to authenticity and transparency, it's okay to build in some additional values that you know are important for scaling, but you have to be very clear of saying these are our aspirational values. So I
Mhm.
also believe in splitting values, not just like one set, but to having your innate set of this is our default, this is who we are, and this is how we function even under crisis and stress. And then this is the one or two additional that we know are important for building an organization. We're not there yet. And we need to hold each other more accountable, especially the leadership when things are hard. And we give you permission to hold us accountable to that. And so that doesn't happen right now. Like people are very hush hush and quiet when you are in a larger organization and you bring in these values and all these kind of things. So that's where I am trying to break the mold and test out a new approach to a more strategically aligned, operationally accountable, and natural and true set of foundational values for growing both startup in survival mode and scale up businesses.
I want to talk more about that approach because I think it requires some very interesting introspectiveness and self evaluation and understanding that this is the piece that you very early need to invest in as opposed to building your product and marketing and all of the things that make sense for building a business. But if you want to build a culture that will sustain, it's going to take this approach, I think, that you're about to share with us.
Yes. Yeah. So there's two parts to this. And it's very I think it's across every industry, but I think it's even more prolific in the biotech or even a tech industry. Most, especially first-time founders, they hire for technical capability. That's actually what they hire for. And they say they'll look for a culture fit, but they actually don't even know how to interview for culture fit when they haven't even defined their own culture. They
Hmm.
just they want to make sure that people can do the work and deliver on the milestones and the goals as fast as they can for what they want to deliver. What's really interesting about that is when things get tough, that technicality only brings you so far. And in the end, we're all complex humans. and it's humans who actually build businesses and
Yep.
deliver on all the other parts. And so to understand and nurture and build and give clear expectations to those humans that come in and work, like I said, you have to be very thoughtful about the value sets of how people will behave to align on delivering on all that stuff. And that's a tough spot when you're working with technical founders, because they want to stay in the easy place that they know and what they need to deliver on, rather than the messy side of humanness. So again, I try to make that a little bit easier, and I do try to bring I would say a scientific kind of level to the approach that I work within. And so that's the first part, is we're dealing with people who default to technical hiring
Hmm.
and are not taking the importance and the success of bringing in that kind of human aspect that's many times even more important. For the more seasoned CEOs that have been through the ringer multiple times, you'll see the progression of them. They'll start building their businesses in a very different way after the third one that they go through. If they're a serial entrepreneur, they will hire administrators a lot earlier. They will hire an HR and people strategist. They'll step stage it more appropriately a lot earlier, and they will define their values a lot earlier in their series. So you know what works and what doesn't. Just look at the masters that have already been through it. So as I mentioned before, the traditional approach to coming up with foundational or core values within an organization is you usually hire a partner with a pretty seasoned communications firm, and they come in, or again, an HR learning and development team or things along those lines. And they come in and they run different, I would say, focus groups, and they hang out and they, listen, and they talk to the leadership, and they have a couple surveys, and they come up with like the words, right? And they'll do some creative exercises too. Like the one that's find a default is, what kind of, if you were a car, what are some terms that you would use if you were a car, right? Because they're trying to get down to adjectives and ultimately how the organization is feeling about how they're functioning and what they desire. I think that if you ask somebody, and we've seen this in interviews before, and you say, so do you feel you're a good communicator? And they'll be like, yeah, I'm an awesome communicator. But have you seen that actually in action, and when it really counts and when it really matters? And that person's perception of what a good communicator is could be wildly different from what the business or the individual or the boss is thinking is good communication.
Right.
So the way I'm trying to approach it is take this more subjective approach. And I agree, this is it to some degree always going to be semi-subjective in its own realm, but I'm trying to pull it back and get it a little bit more objective through the way that I'm approaching it. So I'm trying to move from this more subjective, you tell me what you feel when you're here and what you feel we want to be working as norms, and everybody knows the buzzwords: teamwork, collaboration, accountability, integrity. Like you start rattling them off and they're all the same across. When you push really comes to shove, and I actually do an exercise after I implement, the core values when I bring them to the team, and I give them very difficult scenarios that I actually have been in, and ask them to make decisions against their current core values that they want to implement, and how would they prioritize those core
Right.
values, and how will you actually move forward with those. And it's really interesting when you get to the transparency one, and I give them a couple of the scenarios, and they go, oh no, we don't want to be that transparent, right? And so being very clear about what kind of transparency you are bringing to the table. So the approach that I'm doing is I am actually working across 3 different kinds of personality assessments that are out there, that are rooted in both behavior and, I would say, default behaviors and value sets.
Hmm.
And first one that I give the leadership team is I give them Strengths Finder 2.0, which is one of my favorites. I take it again every 5 years. It's a very simple, easy to understand. I call it the awesomeness survey, where it is, don't worry about what you're terrible at. Just do what you are awesome at and find other people to do what you're terrible at. I love that philosophy, because when
Yeah.
you are in your when you're in your flow of your natural talents that jazz you up and energize you, you are so efficient. You are so in awe of other people's talents that when you're working with them, you're both feeding off of each other because you're like, I can't believe you can do that. And the other person's like, I can't believe you can do that. And then we're working together and we're creating this amazing stuff. So I love StrengthsFinder as finding the natural talent and default flow of each of the leaders. So how they're working together. The
Mm-hmm.
second one I bring in is the values and action survey. This is a free online survey that you can take. I do a little bit more of a detailed one because I have to cross-reference it with the rest of the team. But it's a pretty basic, but it's been taken by millions of people all over the world. So they're constantly feeding back into it. So it's a great psychology kind of platform that allows you to more discern people's default values that they've either learned through culture or family or even personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's number two. And I do an analysis at the team level across that when it all comes in. And then the third one is one of the most important to me. And it's fairly a newer personality assessment. I think it's only been around for like 5 years. It's called the Positive Intelligence Assessment, and it's called the Saboteur Assessment. There's a whole model around this from Shirazad Shamin, I think his name is, that created this model. And this is one of my favorites, and it's important that I pull this in as the third one. It's free, it's online, and it helps you understand your default behaviors of what happens when you are in a high stress or crisis situation. And they're actually wonderful, beautiful values, but are pushed too far. So they start breaking down relationships and situations in bad ways because of the way that you are overcompensating. I will give you a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
One of the top ones for me, there's two: hypervigilance, which is somebody who's constantly worrying about the future, constantly planning for the future, always being like, what's going to happen? Oh, the shoe's going to fall. This is great when you're an administrator because you're always, have plan ABC on behalf of your team. But if you're a leader that is constantly saying no and being worried, and this filters into the organization, and you can't have that, right? And if you have too many people, they're all hypervigilant, nothing's ever going to get done. So understanding that. I'm a stickler. This is somebody who really loves, organizing information and needing to have all the information there, and just having very clear boundaries around things. And again, this could be beautiful if it's used in its tempered state, but when it comes in stress or crisis situations, it could be absolutely detrimental. So I give this, and this is usually rooted in, it's that it's not around self-awareness per se. It's almost like this helps get down to the deeper side of an individual outside of saying, yeah, I'm a good communicator. Right. So that's why I like this third one. So then I cross-reference all three of those, and I do my little assessment, and I bring it all to the top of the cream of the crop. And I usually find around 10. I do try usually like a top anywhere between 8 and 10 values that come out of all of those. And then what I do is I don't leave it there. And you'll see trends. You'll see very clear trends among the team. And sometimes I'm actually seeing, I might try to do some research on this in the future, predictors of leadership team members who most likely will end up having major issues within the broader team. And I'm not there. I don't have enough data in order to do that, but that would be a great follow-up research project for me in the future. So the second thing I do is I take this information and I take that top 8 or 10 and I place it in a document that I then give to all the rest of the employees. Again, there's usually a max of 8 employees that I will give it out to. I explain the concept behind it and the philosophy. And the first column has a column that says, rate this value on how important it is to you on a scale of 1 to 5. The next column I have next to it is, rate this value on how often you are seeing this in your place of work. This gets to the point of the hypocrisy and people who say that they are behaving in a way versus how they actually are behaving in the way. And so you can see very clearly where there's a disconnect. And if you see that this value is very important to the employees and they're not seeing it in their day-to-day, we need to pay attention to that. And we have to say, is this going to be a default, like innate value? or is this going to be an aspirational value? And there's a disconnect.
Right.
And you can see within your employee base, like what's important to them. And so what do we have to bubble up that we can all work on together, but not make it inauthentic?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the process that I use. I will say I go the extra step usually. And since I have a communications and marketing and branding background, my mom ran a graphic design firm for like 35 years. So it's just in my blood. Like I love doing it. I will actually take the information and I don't just give them the words. I actually will try to craft a branded set of values for them to start with, and they could take it or leave it, or they modify it usually. And if they even want to go a little bit further, I have a workshop with them to push them on some of the values, like I said before, especially around the concepts of accountability, transparency, integrity, and there's one more, collaboration. Those are the 4 words that always trip up leaders. They think they know what they mean, but they actually don't. They need to be very clear on how they're going to define that for the organization. So then I basically come back, I give them these little branded things and I say, so do you like it? And sometimes they'll be like, I hate this, and no. And I've actually had some companies stop with me because they're like, ooh, that's too much of a mirror for me and I don't want to go any further with this. So I like that too. I like that I'm shining a light in truth and authenticity of what is really going to be happening here, so that you can remain true with your branding and your recruitment and your expectations and those kinds of things. It's important to also understand that you need to operationalize these. You can't just leave these as words around. And we could talk about that in a hot second if you wanted to do that too.
As like oh, cool, this was a nice exercise. Glad we did it. But implementing that and sticking with it. So I do want to talk about that because I think we unfortunately oftentimes will find the shiny new thing that we think is going to influence our culture in a positive way, or maybe right the ship or whatever they need to use it for. And then it somehow at some point, often sooner rather than later, gets tossed out the window.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're so on point. And like I said, I would say the majority of companies that have gone the traditional route of working on finding their core values at a post 50 person company, they're usually using it as a backtrack to try to correct behavior that they're not liking that they're seeing. So I fully agree with you on that. When I speak with leaders and I say, can you define culture for me? And most of them can't. Or they go the safe route. Oh, well, it's about building camaraderie and, high performing teams. And it's about, some fun and events and these kinds of things. And I say, actually, it's a lot deeper and harsher than that. So I first give them Simon Sinek's version. Culture is who you hire, fire, and reward. It's as simple as that. Again, your decision and your resourcing, where does it go from a leadership, and how does that trickle into the organization? Then I go a little bit, wider, and I follow an individual who actually studies drama in organizations. Her name is Cy Wakeman. And she wrote the book, which I love, called Reality-Based Rules of the Workplace. It's a little bit utilitarian at points, but overarching, it's an amazing philosophy of holding accountability to oneself and to others. And she says that, values and behaviors and culture are ultimately built and nurtured by the worst behavior that is allowed to proliferate from leadership. So that's the next level. Then what I say is I kind of mesh those two together, and I see core values as being, or foundational values, as discerning, codifying, and communicating the behaviors that the organization is seeking to hold people accountable to, not only for themselves, but for everybody, but especially at the leadership level.
Right.
And that's something that I think sometimes is not happening in a much more, consistent way. And like you said, it goes off the rails very quickly. And so this is why when I say we need to operationalize foundational values, you need to integrate it as a systemic systems, communications, mindsets throughout every part of the organization, not just sitting in HR or having it up on the wall. What does that look like? When I talk with leaders, I say, you will use this one. The default is always, okay, well, we'll use this in our recruiting materials and when we're onboarding employees. And I'm like, well, that's great. That's great. And we can do that. important for when you're bringing in. But even so, how could we layer that on even one step further on the process and maybe create a competency matrix that is associated with this? And then we come up with behavioral interview questions that are very specific to each of your values that you integrate into that process.
Right.
Number two, goal setting at the corporate level. I actually come in and help train on OKR process as well. And it's very unique and niche in the biotech industry because, again, how we have to approach the whole process of getting to like a declared candidate and getting into clinical and all this other stuff. Most of the time in most companies, you find organizations, they will hyper focus in on, again, the technical product that they're working on.
Right.
We're not just building that product. You are building a business. And when you have investors, you need to be very clear that you are building a much more cohesive business. And so when you're setting corporate goals, you want to make sure that you are aligning with your current foundational values. I will give an example. If you have a core foundational value that says, we believe in a growth mindset. We want to see people learn and grow here. If you do not have resourcing or a budget line item or something in your corporate goals that is showcasing the explicit development opportunities for your employee base for the upcoming year. So what does that mean, right?
Yeah,
Like
then you don't mean that.
You don't mean that because you are not making decisions around that and you are not resourcing it when push comes to shove. I'm not saying you have to be equal across all of where your efforts, resourcing, or money goes, because the reality is you need to sell stuff and focus on your core competency in order to keep your business growing, thriving, and surviving. I get that. So you can skew like where the percentages go, but you cannot ignore these other aspects of building a business, which include people, which include actual process and structure, which include, not just financing and the money and the product. And so this is where we start working and integrating that into core values. Then you have to link performance management and budgeting and headcount into these values as well. And so you have to set these criteria up to align, and you take those, again, very explicit values, and you decide, okay, are these aligning when we ask these questions against these values? I think the third part is that when you are trying to build out when you're scaling up, you might even have to go back and reassess some of those values because you might be growing in a different way, and it's okay. You shouldn't need to revamp all of them, because if you're doing that, then something's wrong. But when you're growing, people evolve, people change, and the leaders change. And so you do have to kind of look at it. But I had created another framework called the P5 Flex framework, which helps showcase how do you kind of build this out so that you have very specific consistency across how you're addressing all parts of a growing organization. So operationalizing is very important to me, because another aspect that usually gets left to the wayside when especially an overburdened HR department is the only person that supposedly owns culture, which should never happen. It should never happen. Yeah.
So the big question that I have for you then is, because we've seen this work in companies that are newer or fewer than 10 in terms of headcount, or, and I say newer as in like maybe they're early to build and have the opportunity to do this early on. Is it too late for everyone else? Is it too late if you're an enterprise organization? Is it too late if you're dinosaur age?
I'm not sure if I can answer that. And I think that I'm cautious to answer that, because I've actually built other models and other passion parts of my life that I straight up thought could never be implemented in larger established companies. And yet people are currently doing it. So I just think it's easier when you're on the front end, which is why I highly encourage new founders and young entrepreneurs, and even, multi-time serial CEOs that maybe haven't done this as early on, to do it in the very early stage. It's going to make your life so much easier and set you up for so much more success. So I can't say. I think it'll be a lot harder to do it on the back end of a larger company that's already scaled, and even a layer of harder if you already had established core values, right? I think it's just really hard to do that pivot. It would have to be a complete, it's almost like you have to do an internal rebranding and bring everybody through the process and be like, we are starting from scratch here. And are you willing to walk over the line with us on this new identity that we are bringing forth? Because in order for us to grow and thrive and evolve, we need to do this exercise. And you just have to put it out there and be, I think the leadership would have to be really vulnerable in order to do that. So I think it's possible. Yes. Will it be difficult? I think yes. And so that's why I'm highly encouraging people to bring it back a little bit earlier in the process, because it'll just make your life so much easier. And I do want to do a little caveat, because I know with the platform that you and Compt, are putting together in order, and it's rooted in a philosophy, a very human-centric philosophy of personalized reward and recognition systems that allow more flexibility and impact, and I think autonomy around how people are engaging at work. This is the next wave of layering in to what I consider a major change and the future of work. And I'm starting to see inklings of it, where we are needing to get a lot better of understanding our employee base, not as a homogenous mean, but how, just like precision medicine, how do we come to where the people are at to support them for their highest potential and keep them engaged for where they're at life? And so I see kind of, there's this really great, beautiful blend of those two kinds of things. And so I did want to give a little shout out to the work that you're doing, because I think the philosophy behind it, and when I was introduced to it, I was like, whoa, this is big time. And this is going to be an amazing opportunity, again, for very progressive companies that already understand the operationalizing, because to me, the platform is an operationalizing of a core value of really honoring and respecting the individuality and uniqueness of each employee and giving them the service in order to do that.
Oh, that's a perfect way to bring us full circle. I love that. But I should have expected that from you with your background in marketing and branding. It makes a lot of sense. You get what I'm trying to put down here.
I get you.
Lynn, before we go, I wanted if we could sum up our conversation, and if there was only one thing that people walked away with from listening to this, what would you hope that is?
I think what I would want individuals to walk away from is we need a mindset shift around the terminology and the concept of what culture is and how it truly serves a business and how we approach it, especially from a leadership perspective. And there's an opportunity to do that. And I think that there's going to be a forced reckoning in order to do that, because the future of work is here, it's now, and it's demanding much more than it ever has. And also the social contracts that have come post-COVID with employees redefining their own work identity. It's a whole new ballgame out there, and we can't go back to the way things were. We just can't. And so I really believe that this new mindset of understanding, discerning, and codifying and clarifying and communicating and holding people accountable to earlier foundational values that are split into innate values and aspirational values can really set companies up for ultimate success. And not only the companies, but the leaders themselves, which I've worked close enough with many, many, many CEOs. And I know the pain and pressure and the journey that they have to traverse in order to keep their businesses alive to that next level. And it can be a difficult one. And so this can be a shoreline to grab onto when you really need it. And so don't be afraid to do the work up front. Don't be afraid to do the work up front.
Fantastic way to summarize it. Lynn, if people want to reach out to you because they're interested in this work, they want to integrate it in their own companies, they're trying to build something more meaningful, more human, and they need your help, where can they find you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to find me, there's two places that I mainly hang. The first one is LinkedIn. I'm on there and I'm constantly posting things. And so I'm very active, and you can just send me a message on there. The other place is actually just hit me up through my main website, which is it's executivemanagementpartners.com, but I shortened it so it's easier. So it's execmpc.com. So that's exec, EXEC, M as in Mary, P as in partners, C as in consulting.com. So execmpc.com. And you can send a message to me there. And I love meeting kindred spirits who are as passionate about this as I am. So that's how we met, right? So here we go.
Exactly. That is what this show is all about. I am here to network with people who just so deeply care about creating a better world of work for themselves, their coworkers, all of us truly. And if you would like to be a guest on Getting Personal with Compt, I am always looking for people to come chit chat with me. Send me an email at lauren@compt.io. Until then, we'll catch you next time.
Thanks so much.